Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. I'm Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Beadle, Head of Ozone and Pricing at Grosvenor Leasing. Hello Steve.
Hi Kate.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Looking forward to our conversation because I know that you've got a lot that you want to discuss today. So I think without further ado, let's dive straight in at the deep end with the rather well-discussed topic of the delay to the end of sales date for new petrol and diesel vehicles. So it was 2030, it's now been pushed out to 2035. For some SMEs, I'm sure that announcement was a relief and has taken the pressure off them. But are there any risks for SMEs if they do delay the switch to electric vehicles?
Of course, there is a risk when moving any deadline that you become relaxed and, I guess, focused on other things. The issue then is that the revised deadline will creep up on you and you soon realise that you perhaps haven't planned for it. Also, with such a huge focus on ESG within tenders and such like, if you're not seen to be pushing forward with your plan for zero emission motoring, then it could result in perhaps missed business opportunities. So last year, we actually did some research across our customer base regarding some of the key criteria when appointing preferred suppliers, and environmental credentials was high up there. And with the range of EVs available now, I guess the question is, why wouldn't you continue to make the switch regardless of the deadline being pushed back? But then on the flip side, with the counter argument in my head, we also need to be slightly pragmatic with our view. So it very much depends on the fleet in question. SMEs perhaps running a smaller amount of vehicles are able to respond to change far quicker than a large corporate fleet that has much more to consider.
Steve, I completely agree with you, and I'm really glad that you kind of raised this whole procurement challenge, because Scope 3 emissions isn't necessarily relevant for SMEs directly, but indirectly they may be starting to see through tenders that are coming out that actually they've done themselves out of a job potentially by not making sure that they're decarbonising their fleet. Yeah. It's a challenge, and I think the other obvious dimension to this is that the zero emission vehicle mandate is biting hard now and will be really heavily in play by 2030. So the fact that legislation says 2035, they may even find it hard to actually get hold of these vehicles come 2030.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely.
Right, okay. And you touched on this, Steve, that there are reasons why SMEs may want to delay this electrification process. And we often talk about cost, lack of time and lack of knowledge. But what advice would you give to SMEs that could help in these areas?
Yeah, I mean, we're conscious that there are some organisations that are still hesitant about the suitability of electric cars and vans. So it's something that's been really high on our agenda. As a result, we have kind of developed what we believe is two unique solutions. The first, called Evaluate, which enables customers to kind of dip their toe, I guess, if you like, in the water without huge commitment. So it's a funding solution that offers used EVs over a flexible lease period, meaning companies can try an electric vehicle without long-term commitment. And then the second one, which is purely for commercial fleets, we have our electric switch program, which allows, I guess, the more nervous customers to order perhaps an ICE van today via a normal agreement, which can then be switched to an EV without penalty when a suitable electric model becomes available.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So they could stick with their usual 4 or 5 year cycle for the ICE vehicle, but actually if in 2 years' time they want to switch, then do they get the ICE then for the remaining 3 years, or is it a start again?
It can be either case. So we'll work with the customer, to suit their replacement cycle or needs. So yeah, we see it, as a brilliant way to just to help with those anxieties, perhaps.
Yeah, and I love your Evaluate project. I'm not just saying that; it's a great product. Particularly this whole cost thing is a challenge. So if you are able to bring those lease costs down, and we know certainly, you're at the coalface of this, but the EV people, all the concerns around the battery life and the battery state of health, just aren't those concerns really are disappearing. So a used EV that's maybe 12 or 18 months old or even 2 years old, actually the performance on the battery should be exactly the same as it is almost from new.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, going back a number of years, there were high concerns of drop off and degradation, but the batteries are lasting so well, and manufacturers are backing that with warranties anyway. So the confidence is there.
Yeah, and I think that is an important message to get across to SMEs as well, because sometimes what you read in the press isn't necessarily the reality that you've experienced over the last few years. So let's say we're lucky enough and we have SMEs that are saying, right, let's go for it. Let's take this plunge and electrify. What are the first steps that they should be considering?
Well, I mean, one thing we do come across, and it can be quite easy to be put off by the initial on-the-road cost of electric vehicles. However, what we try and do is bring in the whole life cost modelling, which gives a much more balanced view of how electric vehicles compare over the period versus the equivalent diesel or petrol vehicle, bringing them in to the forefront in actual fact. And it's also important to look at the existing fleet to understand current habits such as mileages, the areas that vehicles are covering. Do the drivers have facilities to charge at home? So what you're effectively trying to do is map out which vehicles would be best suited to be in electric, and therefore what are the options for those who may not be ready. And a really easy way to collect all of this information is to do a quick driver survey, and the results will then allow you to make informed decisions going forward. And we are conscious that electric vehicles will perhaps not suit every driver right now, but not forget this is all about transitioning. It's actually a process. So it's not a fix for today. It's a journey. And the driver survey will also engage employees, as you'll hear about concerns. You'll hear about those who are really keen to try and jump into an EV right now, and the latter will probably go on to be sort of company champions for the transition.
Perfect. I mean, absolutely perfect, because employees can make or break this, can't they? If it's not handled properly, if they don't feel that they've been consulted, if they're not completely bought into this, it could be a pretty rocky road. But certainly my personal experience and my experience of people that I've worked with is that once you can get someone into an EV, they very rarely want to go back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So we've talked about electric vehicles, which is extremely important, but there are, aside from zero emission vehicles, there are other ways that SMEs can reduce emissions from their transport operations. What do you advise your customers to do in this area?
Well, as you know, Kate, mobility is not just about cars and vans, of course. Getting employees from A to B opens up a huge range of options, and then of course there's actually the option to not travel at all. By using online meeting platforms like us today, you can avoid the need to travel completely. But we find it's a case of looking at all scenarios to understand what's best for the business while achieving perhaps the lowest carbon footprint possible. There's mobility as a solution apps, which can be really useful for this. They allow employees to enter the start and end location, and the app will then calculate the best routes while considering cost and emissions. And we're also seeing a real push for car sharing too, and we're seeing companies provide certain incentives to increase the uptake for this.
Yeah, and you kind of, I completely agree with you. And at the very beginning when we were speaking, Steve, you said that SMEs can treat this as an advantage because they can move quickly and they can be nimble. And I do think that applies to mobility as a service solutions as well, because when you're dealing with a relatively small workforce, it's much easier to very quickly know whether or not getting public transport is going to be suitable for that person, or whether indeed it's going to be suitable for that particular job that they're doing on a particular day. Which, when you've got a much larger company, it's more unwieldy and much harder to control. So, I mean, there are real opportunities, I think, for SMEs to gain an advantage and be nimble and be innovative in some of the things that you've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the mobility as a service is a really interesting one, and yeah, I think it's gathering momentum really rapidly.
Yeah. Good. Well, Steve, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Today has been no exception. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. And of course, thank you to Grosvenor Leasing for joining GreenFleet Talks. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you for listening and join in to GF365 again soon.